This is the legend of the Pacific Ocean Predator of 1980. It was early summer of 1980 when best friends and professional divers Bill and John had just graduated college and were headed out to California. Bill and John grew up with each other on the East Coast, and they started diving with each other at a young age. And this trend continued until after high school, when they both chose different colleges in different parts of the country. So after a 4-year hiatus due to college, they were reunited, and they decided instead of going into their careers, they'd take one last summer of leisure. So that summer, they decided to go to Santa Barbara, California, as they had heard that it had some of the best diving destinations in the world. Namely, due to the fact that the coastline is laden with shipwrecks, dating back all the way to the 1800s. So they packed up all their things and headed out west, not knowing what they were going to do for work, only having the place they were going to stay lined up. But as excited and eager as they were on the way out there, a couple of weeks after arriving, their morale had taken a hard hit. They found out that they were about a month too late. All of the diving jobs had already been taken up and were booked for the summer. So in order to make ends meet while they looked for diving gigs, they both took jobs at a local bar right near where they lived. They were at that bar virtually every single night. Even on their off nights, they found themselves there, drinking their blues away. It wasn't until about a month after their arrival that they finally caught a break. It was on a particular off night. A gentleman they hadn't seen at the bar before walked in. He was an older gentleman, probably in his 50s. He sat down, called the bartender over, and ordered a drink. At first, John and Bill didn't pay much attention to him. It wasn't until he started talking to the bartender about his yacht off the coast that their ears perked up. They continued somewhat eavesdropping on the gentleman's conversation for about a half hour when they finally heard exactly what they wanted to hear. He was looking for divers who would come hang out on his yacht for a couple of weeks and dive for lobster, stocking him up for the summer. And that was their cue. They got up from their table, approached the man, bought him a couple drinks, and explained their situation. It couldn't have played out for them more perfectly. They finished their drinks, he gave them a time to meet him at the docks the next night, and they went their separate ways. Bill and John were elated. That very next night, they met the old man at the docks, they got in his speedboat, and they headed out to his yacht. As they approached, they could see it was live. There were women everywhere, and people were partying. The old man looks at him and says, "I hope you boys are ready to party." Bill and John just look at each other and smile. They partied all night, knowing the next morning they had to dive, too. When their alarm goes off the next morning, they slowly roll out of bed, hung over as hell. "Shake it off," Bill says to John. "We got to get ready to dive." With those words, they both got a little enthusiasm, made their way up to the top deck, and put on their gear. They hopped in the water and began making their descent towards the bottom. They were making their way towards a nearby Liberty shipwreck to check it out and grab lobsters because they knew they'd be around the ship. Everything was going smoothly and their hangover was slowly starting to wear off, and they were at about 60 feet. They continued descending when suddenly an eerie feeling overtook them, and that's when they heard it, a loud roar from something in the distance. They stopped and just looked at each other. They could tell they both were contemplating going back to the ship, but they kind of just pointed at it and wrote it off as that was the source of the noise. They finally found their first gig diving and they weren't going to screw it up, so they slowly continued to make their descent. They got to the bottom and began searching for lobster and kind of forgot about the noise they had heard previously. And as they were looking on the ocean floor, they noticed that a large shadow passed over them very quickly. And that's when something strange happened. All of a sudden, the water around them got very, very warm. They kind of looked at each other in bewilderment, but continued on as if nothing was happening, when suddenly, out of the blue, a massive creature snatches John and takes him into the abyss. It all happened so fast, Bill didn't even get a look at what it was. All he saw was blood. Bill looked at the cloud of blood in complete shock, frozen with fear. He didn't know what to do. He continued looking for his friend for a few more seconds, but he was nowhere to be found. And that's when he decided his best choice was to make the ascent back to the ship. He swam with all his might, just waiting for his number to be called next. He gets to the boat, hops on, and tells the old man, we gotta go now." The old man asks, "Where's John?" He's gone. As much as he hated leaving his best friend behind, he knew there was no chance he survived. On the way back to the docks, they radioed authorities and told them exactly where John went missing. They came out and did a search. They never found John, but they did find some of his scuba gear. His tank had a large scratch in it. Along with his gear, they found something that was very peculiar. They located a massive talon on the ocean floor near where the attack took place. It measured 9 inches in length, and it was like nothing they had ever seen before. It looked as though it came off a creature that was of prehistoric origin. There was virtually no animal in the ocean that had this type of talon. 3. Pacific Ocean Predator, Part 3. So at the time of the incident, when the old man radioed in that John was missing, apparently a reporter was on the same channel. It was the emergency channel for the Coast Guard. After hearing it, he thought it would be a juicy story, so he headed down to the docks. And that's when he saw all of John's equipment and the talon, and he quickly began taking numerous pictures. The Coast Guard had laid everything out on the deck, and one of them happened to be standing nearby. The reporter asked him a few questions, and that's when he heard the local police pull up. So he figured he better get out of there before they confiscate his camera. He assumed that night they would report it on the air at around 11 p.m. He took the camera and processed all the photos in the dark room at the news station. He had his entire story planned out. It was about 20 minutes before they were going to go on air when somebody arrived. He was dressed in all black and looked like a government official. He told them they better not air this story. They questioned it at first, but eventually gave in. They could just tell this guy was definitely somebody who didn't want to cross. After he left, the reporter ran back to the dark room to look for the negatives. They were all gone. Bill didn't sleep for weeks. He was completely upset, especially the fact that they didn't air the story. So one day, when he was really angry about everything, he contacted a newspaper that was more likely to share his story. He met the reporter at a park and divulged everything. And the next day, they did post it in their newspaper. This gave Bill slight peace of mind until later that night when his phone rang. He heard a man's voice on the other end, and they told him he better shut up about the story or he's not going to like the consequences. He was so angry, at first he resisted. But then the man started reciting his parents' names and their address on the East Coast. He suddenly fell silent, and that's when the man told him he better get the hell out of town if he knows what's good for him. He spent the next couple days packing up their apartment, and he took off, never to be seen in the area again. Apparently, a couple nearby neighbors had said that he had a new vehicle when he left, and it was a vehicle that they knew he couldn't afford. And nothing pertaining to his and John's story ever resurfaced after that. Everything was quiet for the next couple weeks until one day that changed quickly. About a year prior, a modernized oil rig was set up in the Pacific Ocean. It had all the newest tech, and it is said that it could drill deeper than any oil rig in the world at the time. So a couple weeks after Bill's incident, a tugboat was making its way back to shore from the oil rig when they radioed in a distress call for Pacific Ocean Predator, Part 4. So one day, a tugboat that was used to haul large equipment to the oil rig was making its way back to shore. There was the captain and 3 employees on board when suddenly something massive hit the tugboat. Whatever it was hit it so hard, it actually knocked them off their feet. The captain quickly got up and radioed back to the oil rig while increasing speed.
Tugboat back to headquarters, tugboat back to headquarters.
Yeah, go ahead, tugboat.
This is the captain speaking. Something massive just hit our boat. We're not sure what it is.
And just as he was finishing his sentence, boom, it hit him again.
Headquarters, we're going to need a hand out here. Could you send something out as soon as possible?
Then, boom, a third time, and the tugboat started taking on water.
We're taking on water. We're taking on water. Send someone quick. Help!
The last calls from the tugboat were absolutely terrifying, and when they got to their location, there was nothing but a few items floating, not one man above water. So whatever it was huge and merciless, and it took everybody on the boat that day. After this incident, the military got involved. Upon their investigation, they interviewed a couple of workers from the oil rig, and what they found out was absolutely insane. About a month or so prior, they were drilling, and they were thousands of feet below the bottom of the ocean, when one day, they broke into a miles-long cavern that had some sort of special mineral in it. They described it as a subterranean cave system that probably went on further than they could even imagine. But what's odd is that they reported that the night after they broke into the cavern, they kept hearing odd sounds coming from the water around the oil rig. They described it as some type of high-pitched shriek or a loud roar. They said that it stopped by the next morning and they never heard it again or had any type of incident until the tugboat. After hearing this, the military concluded that they must have let out some sort of prehistoric creature that was living down there for probably thousands of years. Once they had gathered all the information, the military officials concluded that the creature had to be almost 100 feet long. And it was at this moment that they didn't even contemplate trying to capture the beast. They knew exactly what they were going to do. They contacted a top secret division of the Navy at the time. This division actually trained dolphins to take commands and attack enemies underwater. They would assign up to 10 to a group and they'd run like a wolf pack, attacking their target all at once. Why they were lethal? They would fix weapons to their nose that they would ram with. 5. The military's encounter with the Pacific Ocean Predator, Part 5. So they trained the crew of dolphins that they were going to use to take out the monster. And about 3 days later, it was time to send them on their mission. They couldn't let this beast roam the waters any longer. They fixed each dolphin's nose with a weapon that came to a point. So when they'd hit the beast, it would pierce him and then release. And fixed to each weapon was an explosive that would trigger as soon as it was released from the dolphin's nose. After release, it would give the dolphins a few moments to get some distance, and then, boom, they would explode. The Navy SEAL called one dolphin in particular to his boat. He did some sign language while speaking the commands, and the dolphin nodded, then took off. Each pack had one lead dolphin, and they would tell the lead dolphin what they wanted done. He would go back and communicate to the rest of the team the mission. They watched on the radar as the dolphins moved through the water swiftly in unison. Though it was the 1980s and they couldn't fix him with a camera, they could fix him with a tracking beacon. It took a couple hours, but the dolphins finally located the creature. The beast was fast, but not fast enough. The dolphins outmaneuvered him, and 8 out of 10 of them pierced him with their weapons. So 8 of the 10 explosives were triggered, and the dolphins scattered. The beast didn't know which way to go. He continued on for a few moments, not realizing what was about to take place, when suddenly, boom, 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 boom! The water turned bright red, and chunks of the beast began to float to the top. Back at the boat, the SEALs saw exactly what they wanted to see. They watched as the beacon surrounded the target and attacked at once. A couple hours later, you could see the dolphins off in the distance. The leader popped his head out next to the boat. The Navy SEAL communicated with him in sign language and asked him if they got the mission done, and the dolphin shook his head yes. They went on to gather as much evidence as they could from the remains of the creature for testing, never releasing the results to the public. From that day forward, the Pacific Ocean Predator of 1980 was never spoke of again. Hope you all enjoyed this story. Obviously, it's for entertainment purposes only. I'm not sure, it's hard to say whether or not something like this could be true. Never know. Either way, stay tuned in for some more crazy content from me. I am out. This is the legend of the Bigfoot-human war of 1855. Thomas Tubby was an abnormally large gentleman, even for a Choctaw native. His father, Anali Tubby, stood 2 inches over 8 feet in height and weighed almost 350 pounds. And his grandfather wasn't far behind at almost 7 feet in height, so naturally, Thomas and his sons were extremely tall. This, along with being super strong and fierce, made the Tubby men some of the most renowned warriors of their time. Though his father and grandfather were out of the business, Hamas and his son were the point riders for a Choctaw Nation cavalry known as the Light Horsemen. The people of the Choctaw Nation often got a chuckle at the name of the cavalry, considering the men were so big and riding draft horses. The majority of the time, things were pretty quiet around the settlement for the Light Horsemen, but in 1855, something would take place that they'd never forget. It was the middle of the summer that year when a group of suspected bandits began preying on the local farmers and the natives. For over a month, these bandits had been taking large quantities of corn, squash, and beans from the farmers. But as of late, they began kidnapping children. The thievery had been taking place not only in their territory, but in Arkansas's native territory as well. The known count of children taken was now around 19, and the people had had enough. So Joshua LaFleur, the well-respected captain of the men, gathered the troops. LaFleur was chosen to be the captain because of his flawless character. He was impeccably honest and brave to a fault. This, along with his part French, part Choctaw Nation lineage, made him the perfect candidate. So early that morning, before daybreak, LaFleur took point of the cavalry and they headed out. He would lead the 30-man group to the state of Oklahoma, into a territory now known as the McCurtain County Wilderness Area. They started their mission leaving the tribal capital of Tuscaloma, and had been riding since 3 o'clock in the morning when they reached the Clover River. They had been riding for almost 8 hours in the July hot summer sun, and it was taking a toll on their horses, so they decided when they led them across the river, they would take a break. They let their horses eat while the men rested and ate as well, and after about 15 or 20 minutes, LaFleur ordered the men to remount their horses so they could start on the last leg of their journey. After a few more hours of riding, it was now around 4:30 in the afternoon, and the men approached the area that the bandits were alleged to inhabit. They were trotting along slowly when suddenly LaFleur raised his fist, signaling the men to come to a halt. As they stopped, they watched LaFleur anxiously as he stood up in his stirrups and pulled a ship's eyepiece out of his pocket, peering forward. Part 2, The Battle Begins. Human Bigfoot War of 1855, Part 2. After peering into the wilderness for a few moments, LaFleur promptly turned to his men and gave the full armed command, "Charge!" The distance between the suspected bandits and the cavalry was about 500 yards. LaFleur and the tubby men were at the front of the pack. The rest of the cavalry was right on their heels. Their horses were covering ground quickly. When they hit a large group of pines that outlined the clearing the alleged bandits were in. But shortly after entering the pines, it was as if they were attacked by an invisible enemy. All but the tubby men and LaFleur's mounts reared up and quickly became uncontrollable, throwing their men to the ground as they hit a wall of stench. It was the smell of death, rotting corpses that had been baking in the sun for weeks. With their horses disciplined enough to stay the course, LaFleur and the tubbies entered the clearing and saw the source of the smell. It was a massive mound of dirt and all the half-eaten bodies of the missing natives. Up to this point, there wasn't much the tubby men and LaFleur hadn't witnessed in the perils of war. But nothing had prepared them for what they witnessed as they entered that clearing. At this point, the majority of the bandits had already fled, but 3 still remained. As they sized up the beasts that stayed behind, they quickly realized these were not men. They stood 10 to 12 feet tall, and their massive frames were covered in hair. The largest of the 3 hopped off the mound, made eye contact with LaFleur, and let out a fierce roar. He had recognized him as the leader, so this was his challenge. So LaFleur drew his saber, and with pistol in one hand, saber in the other, began to charge. He quickly covered the gap with his mount at a full-on sprint, and as he neared the group, the lead beast took 2 massive steps forward and struck his horse with his fist, killing it instantly. This sent LaFleur to the ground tumbling, but he promptly recovered and stood up, both weapons in hand. Without hesitation, he began pouring rounds out of his Patterson's Colt 45, unloading into the beast. The rounds pierced the beast's chest, blood pouring out, but it never even flinched as it made its way towards LaFleur. He emptied the cylinder into the beast, but it never even fazed it, so he resorted to his sword and began slashing it, one strike after another. Still, the demon pushed forward, but as this was happening, LaFleur missed that a second beast was flanking him. Once the captain was in arm's reach, their leader knocked the saber out of his hand, while the second one grabbed him by the head, dismembering him. The tubby men had already began the charge as they watched their fearless leader's body go limp and hit the ground. Part 3, final part. Bigfoot Human War of 1855, Part 3. After the death of their captain, the tubby men grew a fierce rage, and with their Sharps buffalo rifles, they began firing on the beasts. 7 of them fired 50 caliber bullets at the heads of the beast, making their mark with 2 of them. After years of practice, the bullets made contact with their targets. The only problem was 6 shots hit the 2 culprits that killed their beloved captain. Only the youngest, Robert Tubby, who was just 18 years old, had the presence of mind to fire at the 3rd beast, wounding it. In that day, a legend was born. All 6'11", 300 pounds of the young man chased down the wounded beast. When he reached the monster, he dismounted his horse and jumped on its back, pulling out his knife. By the time his father and brothers had gotten to him, he had already decapitated it, holding its head up and letting out a fierce warrior cry. The primal scream even made the tubby mounts panic. The light horsemen gathered their steeds and gazed upon the absolute carnage that surrounded them. The partially consumed bodies of the 19 victims lay upon the mound. The stench of the decaying bodies was horrid, but still wasn't as bad as the urine and feces left behind by the monsters. That smell was stronger than even the strongest of stomachs could endure. And as the rest of the troop finally got to the clearing, they were retching and gagging at the sights. Once they were done dry heaving, the troops gathered the bodies and buried the 19 victims. After, they buried their beloved captain, Joshua LaFleur. Upon burying him out of respect, they gave him a 21-gun salute. Once done with that, they gathered a bunch of brush and logs, and then placed the beasts upon it and lit it on fire. As they rode back to the settlement, each man struggled with visions and emotions they never even imagined. And that day would forever go down in history as the Bigfoot Human War of 1855. I hope y'all enjoyed that story. I discovered it probably 4 or 5 months ago. Whether it's true or not, up to you. I will say that a gentleman commented on one of my sources who lived nearby. He went to look at the battlefield and found 17 graves. Stay tuned for more cringe content like this provided by me. And make sure y'all check out my YouTube with almost 210,000 subscribers and my Facebook page with almost 200,000 follows. I compile my parts to each story into one video on those pages. Until next time, I am out. This is the history of perception glass and how red night vision goggles drove soldiers mad during the Vietnam War. Late last year, reports coming out of a small town in northern Russia alleged that citizens were finding shattered glass that seemingly fell from the sky. But according to residents, this was no ordinary glass. Their claim is that when they looked through it, they would see things otherwise not visible to the naked eye. The following video was posted by a Russian citizen on YouTube, showing how this glass works. Check it out and let me know what you think in the comments.
Короче, целый час там простоял. Нифига больше не увидел. Ладно, давайте, всем пока.
Всем привет. Мне сказали, что в ролике у меня еще 2 шара пролетает мимо. Смотрел. Точно. Сейчас смотрим. Обычное небо, обычные люди, блядь, ходят, все нормально. Оп! Вот такая. Вот они. Вот они, 2 шара. Лево стоит 2 шара. Даже не заметил во время съемки, когда я снимал.
Needless to say, after seeing this video, I dug into the subject, and here's what I found. During the early 1920s, a scientist by the name of Walter Kilner experimented with the chemical derived from coal tar, known as decyinin. This synthetic blue dye was originally intended for use in sensitizing of photographic plates. But during his studies, Kilner would discover that there was much more to this unique chemical than initially thought. In the process of making what he called Kilner screens, he realized that something amazing would happen when placing the dye between 2 panes of glass. After putting on what would later be called aura goggles and looking at one of his fellow employees, he'd realize that he could see that employee's aura. For those of you that don't know, aura is said to be the light that emanates from living beings. And this light can range in color, depending on the nature of the person it's surrounding. Those who were good-natured would emanate brighter, more vivid colored lights, while those who were dark in nature would emanate reds and blues. But it wouldn't stop there. It's believed that his goggles would also allow you to see paranormal entities or even UFOs. This is because of the dye's ability to block out the white light spectrum. This allowed for Kilner's goggles to concentrate on the said aura. At the time, this ability was believed to be limited to psychics and astral travelers, but his goggles allowed for average citizens to obtain it. Of course, after Kilner released his findings, his colleagues in the field immediately discredited him, calling it a paranormal hoax. He'd only end up producing a small amount of his goggles, and if you could find them today, they're worth thousands of dollars. The study of decyanine dye would continue until the 1940s, when the US put a ban on all use of it. So essentially, many believe that he found a way to reach and see another consciousness, that it allowed you to see in another dimension. After 1940, there was virtually no use of the dye until it resurfaced in 2010. A chemist by the name of Tom Buchamp Arnold would begin producing them again, but was immediately shut down. And you can't help but wonder why. This is the history of perception, said Aura. At the time, this ability was believed to be limited to psychics and astral travelers, but his goggles allowed for average citizens to obtain it. Of course, after Kilner released his findings, his colleagues in the field immediately discredited him, calling it a paranormal hoax. He'd only end up producing a small amount of his goggles, and if you could find them today, they're worth thousands of dollars. The study of decyanine dye would continue until the 1940s, when the US put a ban on all use of it. So essentially, many believe that he found a way to reach and see another consciousness, that it allowed you to see in another dimension. After 1940, there was virtually no use of the dye until it resurfaced in 2010. A chemist by the name of Tom Buchamp Arnold would begin producing them again, but was immediately shut down. And you can't help but wonder why. This is the history of perception. I mean, what would be the government's reason for banning decyanine? Is it because it allowed people to see in a different realm or dimension or at another frequency? Based on Walter Kilner's account, it seems that yes, it is possible. Even today, soldiers who wear the green night vision claim they see UFOs that they would not see with their naked eye. This took me to a story of an account that took place during Vietnam with night vision goggles. During Vietnam was when the United States Army first patented and introduced night vision goggles to the soldiers. To test this new technology, they assigned goggles to the more reputable officers' squads to see if they worked proper in the field. So the groups that they supply these goggles to had officers that were more established in Vietnam, meaning that they had been on their second or third tours in country. So they supplied these new night vision goggles to the units, but told the officers and the pilots that they were not to wear them. And though this did raise a few of the men's eyebrows, they just obeyed the orders, and the officers required their teams to wear them as soon as dark fell. At first, the new goggles were a hit. They gave them a tactical advantage, and they allowed them to see very clear at night, just with a little red tint. It wasn't until about a week after wearing them that things started to change very rapidly. First, it was the officers that noticed the men who were wearing them were acting out of character, almost angry. Not only that, but they noticed that they would dart glances up into the trees, looking at things that were seemingly not there. Next, the soldiers would start to fight amongst each other, and the group would just implode and come to a horrible ending. In one case in particular, an officer had been to Vietnam for his third tour. He was more widely known and a very responsible leader. He wanted to get back home after the war, so he really watched his P's and Q's. He and his unit had taken off in about 5 or 6 choppers and were headed to the next rendezvous point. The land they were flying over was generally peaceful. He was the lead of the cluster of choppers, and everything was going smoothly for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the flight. Then darkness fell. "All right, fellas, throw your goggles on. It's time to go dark." He no sooner gave the order when suddenly his gunner started ringing out shots. The captain thought, what the hell? He didn't understand what he was shooting at, as they were flying over a peaceful area. He gets up from the passenger seat at the front of the chopper and starts heading back towards the gunner, and sees that he's shooting not at the ground at the enemy, but in mid-air, parallel to the chopper. The other choppers notice this and suddenly make evasive moves, because he was literally shooting in their direction. "Cease fire, soldier! What the hell are you shooting at?" said the officer. The soldier stops suddenly. He can see that he is sweating bullets, and his eyes are dilated as if he's on pure adrenaline. Knowing that drugs were a problem in Vietnam at this time, he quickly glanced him over and realized he didn't exhibit any behavior of being intoxicated. "Right there, sir! Right there! They're flying right next to us! Don't you see them?" The officer glances over. There's nothing there. "Calm down, soldier. I'm not seeing what you're looking at. Right there! There's some on the treetops! 2 of them! They're looking at me! A couple more shots ring out. Cease fire! Confused, the officer doesn't understand what's going on. Then he looks at the guy. The officer is dumbfounded. He can tell by the look in the soldier's eyes. He believes what he's saying. Describe them, soldier. Sir, they have wings. They're about 7 to 8 feet tall. Their faces look almost like gargoyles, and they have horns. They almost remind me of demons. Aw, come on, soldier, get a grip, get your act together. Then he takes a step back and looks directly at the soldier's goggles. He then hears the voice of his superior. The officers and the pilots are not to wear the goggles. That's when a light bulb goes off. Give me your night vision goggles, soldier. He hands them over to the officer. He puts them on, and he cannot believe what he sees. Off in the distance, looking at him, are 2 winged creatures that look like demons straight from hell. They look at him and then back at each other, and it seems as if they are saying something. And then suddenly, they look at him and begin flying straight at him. He rips the goggles off. What the hell was that? He cannot believe what he just witnessed. After tearing the goggles off as fast as he could, he looks back up and they're gone. What in the world did I just see? After having this experience, he ran straight to the front of the chopper, got on the mic, and commanded the entire crew to take off the goggles. The rest of the team took them off and everything was back to normal. They didn't wear them until the green night vision goggles came out. After the incident, the officer described to his superiors that for the next few months, he had night terrors and continued seeing these entities. And he wasn't the only one. His crew was having the same issue. It took them months to get over just that initial short wearing of the red night vision goggles. He'd notify his superiors and later receive praise for the quick action he took when running into the problem. They'd soon find out that the night vision being in red was what allowed them to see these evil entities. For some reason, the combo of red and the night vision combined allowed them to see almost in another dimension, much like the Decianin. And the majority of the soldiers that experienced these night vision goggles all say the same thing. They were all around them, and it seemed as though they were around us at all times. We just don't see them because they're at a different frequency. They'd eventually switch to the green night vision goggles and have no more issues for the rest of the war. But even today, soldiers claim that when using the green night vision goggles, that they often see UFOs that they would have never seen with the naked eye. So what do you think? Do you think these different colors allowed them to see into another realm? Could we be surrounded by angelic beings? Let me know in the comments.